Ever since the old mainframe days, people have been kind of battling, is terminal better or is using like a windowed graphical user interface environment better? So in discussing the power of the UI or GUI, which stands for graphical user interface, there are a couple of advantages of the GUI. First off is the obvious, which is ease of use. It's so much easier to remember just to push a button as opposed to putting in a long, I'm going to say script or long command, because if you're not in the particular directory in order to run that particular command, first you might have to type in the directory name, which might be very long, and then the program name, and then if there's any switches or anything, and then you have to type in the actual information. So for example, if you're running a database, and like an Oracle database or something, and you needed to insert into one of your tables an updated address, you'd have to run a command that updates, that says, okay, I want to go to, this table and update this information into this particular field. And if you get one character off, you're kind of messed up. You could potentially destroy an entire database. It's better to be able to press one button and then put in the information. Second of all, it decreases the training. So in other words, it's better to show somebody visually what they have to do, and they can get an understanding of the process a lot better if it's visual and the buttons are there, as opposed to having to memorize or know all of these strange commands that might be foreign to them, and it's going to take them forever and a day just to do basic things. And third of all, something that might not be as obvious to everyone is it's actually safer and more secure in some ways to use a UI, user interface, because if you leave, there's nothing more scarier than that blinking cursor, and B, that blinking cursor is highly exploitable. So suddenly you're very vulnerable to any expert that comes in and advertently, like on purpose or inadvertently, exploits your entire environment, because he could put in some, Perl stuff or some fancy Python command or some old world Unix command, and then all of a sudden he's able to take over your network and pwn the network, and that's because you left that terminal open for anyone to use it. It's better that you have, when you have, only buttons and, select areas available to this person, you only allow them to do certain things. Okay, so for example, there is a reason why in the olden days, or when I say olden days, they used to have in my local, either it was a Rite Aid or it was Walgreens or something, in the Kodak developing section, they had a computer, but it was all point and click, because if it was command based, then if you knew what you were doing, you could potentially run the command to wipe out the entire information, which would render the terminal useless. So for example, airport kiosks, there's a reason why there's pictures and you point and you press buttons. You wouldn't want anybody terminal access, because that's highly dangerous. So in this week's videos, we're going to discuss basic tkinter setups. Tkinter is the Python application, one of the many Python applications for creating GUIs. So here it is. All right, as you know, I'm talking about tkinter, the free Python graphical user interface program or application that you go ahead and import into your program like you would import anything else, like importing random. Now, tkinter isn't the only game in town. It's just very convenient, at least from a starter or freshman or beginning point of view, because it's free and it comes pre-packaged with most any distribution distribution of Python since maybe 2.1, and we're in double digits in Python 3 right now. As I said, it's really one of the more popular graphical user interface creation packages. tkinter is. It comes with Python. There's other ones here, like for example WXPython or JPython or Jython, and there is now I have Qt and PyQt and PyQt5. So what Qt is a, I'm going to say, disciplinary multi-language graphical creator toolkit. Qt. PyQt itself is the Python version of it, and then there's PyQt5, which is the most popular right now version of PyQt, and many people prefer PyQt5 over and above tkinter, but because this is like the beginning engineering or automation class, we're just going to focus on tkinter. And again, let's just keep our eyes on forward, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce this cacophony of syntax right here. Looks like we are trying to create a terminal connection to the Kathmandu server, and we're predefining, for example, the idle time, and we are reducing it to a simple window where we have widgets and buttons here, and then instead of pressing enter, we click on connect. And the thing is, the advantage of having a GUI is we have pre-filled items. We can have pre-filled items here, so it's not as much of a guesswork as what the proper terminal command is, because it goes back to the fact that, it reduces, having a UI reduces training, and it reduces, any security thing that can happen. It reduces risk. What do we need to create this UI or GUI environment? Number one, we need a surface. What do I mean by surface? I mean just a window or canvas or anything we can create and draw our widgets, such as buttons, labels, list boxes. So the user is going to go ahead and fill these out directly. So this could be in the shape of a button the user presses, or a field that the user fills in. But this is like a guided, created environment. So the purpose of a UI is really to control and regulate the user's behavior. So it does enhance the it does enhance the system security, because you're not left with this blinking cursor, and in the blinking cursor is this long field, and you could literally type anything in this long field, and it takes a lot of training for you to get a user to know and understand what to type and what not to type. And with terminal commands, some of them are so powerful, with one wrong keystroke, you could destroy a business. I don't know if you've ever heard of that fat finger thing that happened at that hedge fund or at that online trading thing. It happened about 20 years ago. Some trader accidentally pressed the wrong button, and he wound up trading and selling off a bunch of stock, and he or she didn't mean to, and it greatly affected the worldwide stock market. So anyways, you need a surface, you need a place to put you need the widgets in the first place, such as buttons and select boxes. In HTML, they call them select boxes, and that's a good way to think of a UI. Think of like creating an HTML web page, and you have your buttons, and you have your tags, and you have your different things, and it's all encased within this handy dandy window. Now, once you create, now this is just programmatically or syntactically, step 2 refers to just creating the actual widgets. So step 1 is creating the surface, step 2 is creating the widgets, and then step 3 is in placing said widgets onto the surface. So you're creating the widgets, and step 3, you're placing the widgets on the surface. And you're again doing these things with commands. And of course, the command in Python to place a widget, there's several commands, but the command we're going to use is called pack. And when I say the command, it's actually a method, .pack. And then fourthly, you need to loop it. What I mean by that is, and then we'll see what I mean by that in just a second, but with the loop, if you just do steps 1 through 3 and you just execute it, this will flash onto the screen and then disappear. And sometimes it does it so quick you You don't even know it's there. The loop mechanism is called a main loop. The main loop keeps it on the screen for as long as you tell it to. So you're using a big while loop. So the while loop keeps us on the screen for as long as you say, otherwise it will flash and disappear. Think of the 1960s method of creating animation. So with animation, you actually had a pencil drawing of, like, let's say Mickey Mouse, and then after like a 60th of a second or a 6th of a second, they would change the one part of the animation slightly, and then the human eye would detect it as the animation actually moving. So finally, I have here SSH username, password, and the port. So this might be something like a typical terminal command that you would use to SSH or remote log in to a remote server. Now the problem is that every system is different. So if you're starting brand new at a position, okay, at a job, and your boss tells you to please via terminal SSH into this remote terminal, there's so many variations of this simplistic terminal command. It could be SSH, and then this could be -U, or sometimes I've seen -L as in list, and this password could be, instead of just password, it could be -P password, and port, you don't know what port to use and everything. So suddenly you're asking all these questions, and you may not feel comfortable with that, because every terminal command has all these little variations depending on whether or not you're on a Cisco switch or Cisco router, or whether or not you're inside of a Linux box or whatever. So if you just presented the client or the worker with a handy dandy user interface, you might say, like, hey, this is the username right here. I'll just say you. This is the password, and maybe this is the IP and the port number here, and maybe it's already filled in. So if you have to go to the Kathmandu server or something, that you just point and click to a button that says Kathmandu, and then username and password, and you're in, as opposed to having to know what the exact terminal command is to SSH into something. So I'm just saying the whole purpose of GUIs, or a good GUI, is it removes the gray area, removes the fog, and it makes the user know what exactly he has to do to accomplish a certain task. All right, as I said, tkinter, the standard GUI library for Python, but there are other better options as you get more advanced, such as PyQt5, but it's a relatively easy task. As it says, the first thing is importing the tkinter module, and just so you know, in recent times, tkinter is always lowercase. I don't like it that they sometimes, when you Google code or on Stack Overflow or whatever, they actually have capital tkinter. It's actually lowercase tkinter. I actually got this PowerPoint just from a Google search of tkinter and PowerPoint. You can do the same, and the original PowerPoint actually had tkinter with a capital T, and it just drives me mad, because you have to be so careful when it comes to researching Googling things. You have to ensure that the version is consistent with your software version. So this PowerPoint was probably created at a time when Python 2 was the most popular version of Python, although Python 2 is still used highly in, Kali and other hacking tools like that. Python 2 is legacy only. Python 3 is the production, most recent version of Python, and in Python 3, tkinter is lowercase. So please remember that you only, when you import tkinter, you do so as lowercase tkinter. All right. So this is the easiest or simplest web page that we can think of. The first step is to import tkinter. The next step is to utilize tkinter's .tk method, and the next thing is to loop the window. So when you utilize the tkinter method, it creates the window, and then the main loop actually loops the window. Here is an example. Let's go ahead and take a look at the most simplest form of I guess you could say, UI that we could possibly write. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to move this into the screen, and I'm going to go to to my idle right here in Kali. And of course, the first thing we have to do is import tkinter, and that actually brings the tkinter library and gives us access. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to utilize the tk method right here. And let me do that. We'll say something like x is equal to tkinter.tk. So we'll say tkinter.tk, and of course this refers to a method as defined in the tk class, and that alone, that statement x equals tkinter.tk, creates our window. Now the other thing I wanted to impress everyone, if I went ahead and let me go ahead and X this out, and let me exit, and let me once again do Python 3, and instead of saying import tkinter, I'm going to do uppercase tkinter. We are going to get an error message that says no module named tkinter. So keep in mind, when you, just like any programming that you do in whatever language, it does not distinguish between it distinguishes between uppercase T and lowercase t, but it doesn't distinguish the fact that that was like a small type of error, or it's just an everyday error. And to the layperson, the non-programmer, most people would be like, well, what's the difference between uppercase T, tkinter, and lowercase t? We as programmers know that there's a world of difference, so do not let this impede your progress. If by chance you go ahead and import tkinter and you get this module error that says no module named tkinter, make sure that you're not inadvertently doing an uppercase to be proper in terms of the regular English language and rules and grammatical rules. Make sure that you are not, doing that, and make sure everything is lowercase. Generally, that's why I always say in variable names and whatever, start your variable names in lowercase. So for example, we have my total. Now, if you want to make it more readable, just say my total like that, or my underscore total if you want, or my underscore total like that. However, do not start a variable name my total in uppercase, because that's just confusing. Anyways, we'll once again do x equals tkinter tk, and we can see that is the window that is brought up. And then we can go back here and say top.main loop. Well, we can adapt it to our situation here, x.main loop, and that of course ensures, and let me see what's happening here, is that the window has gone behind a Kali right there. See that? So this is the simplest UI. Literally has no widgets on it, but I'm just trying to explain to you that this is literally the most simplest form of a UI that we can think of. Now, I just wanted to explain one more little thing to you. The difference is now we're going to go ahead and use the top two commands that you saw, import tkinter, top equals tkinter.tk. We're going to go ahead and use these two commands and omit the last command, x.mainloop, as we see here. And we're going to see what happens when we just run these two commands, so we can understand the importance of the looping command right here, the looping method that is used on the bottom right there. So we'll say x is equal to tkinter.tk. And let's go ahead and save this and then run it. All right, we are running the command right here, my first page.py, because that is the name of the program. And we can see that nothing, absolutely nothing happens. Well, I can tell you that something did happen, but we omitted the looping method command as we showed it right here, the main loop method, because and I'll even run it again, it just flashed. Okay, we didn't even detect it. There's no window that's open here, because unlike us running it via the idle, here we ran it via a Python file, and when you run it through a Python file, it doesn't loop. However, when you utilize the same two commands in idle, it remains. So for example, if we go back to Python 3 and we'll go ahead and import tkinter, and then we will run x equals tkinter.tk, we see that window always remain because idle runs a little bit differently than a .py file. Let me let's demonstrate. All right, the way idle actually works, and the reason why when you run the first two commands it actually still works is because idle is a continuous loop. So it continually loops through the read, write, and evaluate actions or operations. So when you call on the .tk method in tkinter, you will always see that window, I'm going to say active because it runs through the continuous loop. Now, when you create and run a .py file with Python 3, or in the Microsoft Windows case, just typing Python and then typing the name of the py file, and then you have to make sure you include the extension too. It opens up the file. It runs through a particular sequence of opening up the file, reading the file, writing the output to the screen, evaluating any subsequent information, and then ending it. So the window that supposedly, in your mind, you're probably like, yeah, supposedly it popped up. It did pop up, but it was only popped up with a quick flash under the screen, and then it ends. If we just run import tkinter and then x equals tkinter.tk, I will, if I run x equals tkinter again, we see this continuous window, all right, and we don't need the main loop right there. I'm going to go ahead and exit and then run clear, and then I'm going to run this again, and you don't see a window, even though, for example, we can see that we have the first two commands right here, and we should see a window, but we're not in idle. We are in the, I guess you could call this the regular mode or the programmer's mode, in which we have a text editor and we actually had to import commands and run it via the command line, Python 3, and the name of this program. So we actually, unfortunately, have to do the we have to do x.main loop and then run this, and then let me run it again. And now, because we ran the main loop, we see the window pop up. Okay, all right, now let's actually put something inside of this window to create a real authentic UI. This might seem kind of unimportant, but we see two ways to import tkinter. And we have import tkinter, which seems on the outset to be the most simplistic. And we've seen this other format in which we begin with the word from. So we say, in this case, we can say from tkinter import asterisk, which is actually the same effect as just saying import tkinter. The draw against importing tkinter is that basically we're importing the entire module or package into our current environment, and the advantage of from tkinter import format is that this presumes that if we don't have this asterisk here, we can import by class. So if there is a class, for example, called, I don't know, move or something like that, we can just import the class called move, but we have the asterisk, which basically imports the whole thing anyways. So what is the advantage, or what is the difference between these two methods of, or I shouldn't say the word method because that's actually a technical name. So these two ways, I guess you could say, of importing tkinter, because they're both doing the same thing. It's just different typing, different words. So let's go to our trusty environment right here. Let's go to idle, and let's go ahead and import tkinter, and let's use the tk or the .tk method. So if I said x is equal to tkinter.tk, that would actually give us a window, as it does right there. However, if instead of that, let's just make sure that we start fresh. So let me go back to Python 3, and then I said import tkinter, and this time let's say I said x equals tk. It's going to give me a error because it doesn't know, it says tk is not defined. In order for me to do the same thing without generating an error, because of the way we imported tkinter, we actually have to say tkinter.tk so it knows what the heck I'm referring to. So let's exit out of here and let me type in clear, and then let me do Python 3 again. And this time I'm going to say from tkinter import all, and then I'm going to say x equals tk, and that actually gives me the window because of the difference of how I imported tkinter in the first place. So it all depends on how you want to type or how you want to do things. Now, the difference is they encourage you to use from tkinter import because that implies you're going to be picking and choosing which classes from tkinter you're going to import. So it's giving you that honor, I guess, by saying if there's another function here that's called tk in your local, I'm going to say local RAM or local programming, then if this will override it, that's the only danger. So that's why the other way, the traditional way, that's why they encourage you to do tkinter. If you import tkinter using that syntax, they actually implore you to do x equals tkinter.tk. If this, I hope I'm not over explaining it, but looks like, if you're still not getting what I'm saying, just replay this portion of the video again, and then eventually you'll understand. Let's go ahead and move on to actually creating and populating our window with things like buttons and drop-down boxes and things like that. All right, let's go. All right, let's take a look at our first actual program right here. This, of course, is in the program, I think I just called it my first window or something like that. So we have import tkinter. Of course, we have to call the .tk. I wish I had this in a Word document and I would circle this. We call the .tk method, or shall I say that would be there's somewhere in the tkinter program, so somewhere above this, there's a .py file called tkinter, and within the .py file, there's a class called tkinter, or tk, my apologies, uppercase T, lowercase k, and then open and close parentheses. So there is a class called tkinter, and obviously it doesn't seem to be a subclass, so it's its own superclass. And then within that class, there is a method called title and a method called geometry, and then another method called main loop. And within the title method, it calls the parameter of the actual method of the actual title that you want the window to be called. In this case, we call it welcome. And just to make sure we can identify it when I actually call it, we'll just call it 1, 2, 3. Welcome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just to be a little wild and crazy. Anyways, we have the geometry method within the class called tk, and that is, of course, is calling for the size of the window. So we have 400 by 300. We can make it more of a square, so we could just say 400 by 400. And then, of course, we have the method called main loop, which will loop it onto your screen. And let's go ahead and save this, and let's run it. And we have welcome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we have a perfect box right here. Now we can change the geometry, I guess, and we can say if we wanted like a little rectangle, whatever, we could do 400 by 200, and we can go ahead and change. We can see how the shape of it changes, but we still have welcome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now let's create some sort of a label inside here so you can get the full effect of the UI right here, so you can really understand what it looks like. All right, a couple changes right here. I had to go back to the other way of importing tkinter in order for me to make this work, and we have from tkinter import all, which is the asterisk right there. And so we can now say x equals tk instead of saying tkinter.tk because of the format that we imported tkinter, because we start with from, and then we can say, and this is the same, x equal x dot title welcome and x dot geometry, and let's make it a go ahead and make it a perfect square. So let's say, I don't know, let's do 400 by 400. Go back to that, and then here is our very first widget. In the first widget, the most basic widget is a label, and the label is just going to say hello world. So a label is kind of like going to the store and you see the price tag or something like that, or you see the label of the manufacturer of a shirt or pants you might buy. That's all it is. That's the label right here. Now, the other thing I wanted you to introduce you to is we call this label, we define it via a label, a variable called widget, and in order for us to see the label on the window, we actually have to place it on here, and we can use the .pack method, and we know it's a method as opposed to just a instance variable because the .pack has to be shown with an open and closed parenthesis. So we know that it is a method of the class called tk, and of course there are optional parameters, but we will talk about that when the time comes. But for now, we will have a widget right here, and we can place it onto the window that you see with the .pack method. Then of course this main loop allows us to continually loop the window image under the screen continually until we tell it not to, which by this means we just X out the window. So let's go ahead and let's quit and write it to our system, and let's run it, and we can see that we have hello world right there as our label, and here's our title, and we can go ahead and quit the loop simply by Xing this out. Now let's make this a little bit more exciting by adding some, I guess you could say, formatting to the label. All right, let's go ahead and put and bring some formatting and some creativity to the mix to our label right here. Again, we import tkinter, we create the, and I should put little exclamation, like little descriptions right here. So in this case, we create the window here, or maybe the proper terminology is we initialize it. Here we're importing the drawing or UI module that we're using, and of course there are other packages besides tkinter, but tkinter is the easiest to use right now because it does come wrapped with Python. Here we initialize or create the window. Here we're putting a title into the title bar, and we're controlling the size of the window here. Now here is our first the first formatting aspect. So we're creating a variable, and we see that the variable is equivalent to a tuple. Really, we've never really dealt with tuples because it's really for more advanced applications such as this. So a tuple is like a list. As a matter of fact, we could actually replace these parentheses with the straight brackets, thus creating a list. But when you look at most books and most documentation, they're going to use a tuple in this case. Now, as you might remember, the difference between a tuple and a list is that a tuple, it does not support item assignment. So in other words, it is immutable, and consequently they do use tuples a little bit more than a list when it comes to parameters such as these specific type of applications. So now if you take a look at the formatting right here, it appears that there's a reason for the sequence right here. So this, I want you to pay close attention to the order right here. So 20 obviously is for the size, but what is this? What is this right here? MS serif or whatever. That is a font. So go back to your Microsoft Word, and you can see the different fonts that are available to you. So I know it's kind of a contradiction, and I told you I was all about the fact that here we are creating UIs so we don't have to deal with the terminal, but unfortunately to create the UI for the user behind the scenes, you and I are using our terminal to actually create the UI. So we're doing work and providing services to the user. So we're actually doing the user a favor. So we're making it so that that we want to display the information like hello world, or we could say something like a warning. This is private. Enter at your own risk. So we're telling it how we want to display that message or that label. So widget.config is how we're going to configure that particular widget. So the BG or background, we're defining it as purple. Now we can use single or double quotes. It really doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. Now the foreground, meaning the opposite of background, is yellow. And the widget.config font is equal to label font. So that is the label font right here. And then the rest is what you've seen already. So I'm going to go ahead and right quit this and let's display this. And we can see that, private and enter at your own risk. Let's go ahead and make this font a little bit smaller so we can display the entire message. And let's say instead of label font 20, let's make it half the size, 10, and let's go ahead and increase and change the geometry of our window right here, and let's make it 4 by 800, and let's see what that does. And okay, that kind of changed it long ways, but you can understand, you can see what is going on here. Let's go ahead and change it this way, 800 by 800, and let's see, so we can fit it all in here. This is private, enter at your own risk. Now let's go ahead and change it back. Let's go ahead and change this back to 400 by 400, and instead of this is private, enter in at your own risk, let's just say this is private, and let's make this 10 and back into 20, and instead of MS serif, let's change this to terminal. I'll be happy to provide to you all of the fonts that Python tkinter has, and let's see the effect here. This is private. You can see now it looks a little bit more like a terminal type font.